All right, good morning. Welcome to the Greater Des Moines Partnership in collaboration with Capital Crossroads and the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center at Drake University, our Civility Webinar on creating a civility action plan. I'm sure we will have people trickling in here. Wednesday at 7:30 certainly gets me still, so really glad to have you all here. Thank you for your time. As many of you know who have participated in a couple of our civility webinars previously, we are hosting these to focus on a variety of civility topics that with our goal of enhancing a culture of excellence in the Greater Des Moines region. The topics have educated participants with research-based strategies to enhance civility through core leadership competencies that create a culture of excellence and optimal performance. Each webinar has been 60 minutes in length, and we do have those on our website, so we'll be sure to post those in the chat, the previous two, and we will be recording today's as well and sharing that after our session today. And as I said before, our final civility webinar is focusing on creating a civility action plan. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Andrea Woodard. I lead government affairs here at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, and I will right away kick it off to our facilitator and esteemed host for the day, Scott Racker. Scott is the executive director of the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center at Drake University. Scott has been in that position since the work of the center was founded by former Governor D. Ray, as a lasting legacy to the Iowa sesquicentennial in 1997. Scott's background is ripe with public service, having served in the Iowa House of Representatives and in numerous leadership positions during that time, and since then has really taken his passion for civility, leading to his work and impacting state legislative leaders and staff in all 50 states, U.S. territories, as well as leaders in Canada and Mexico. And with that, Scott, thank you for all your work on these webinars, working with us. I will turn it to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate it very much, kind introduction, and want to thank everybody at the partnership. Jay, I see Tiffany here, Andrea. You've really kept a focus on this in front of our community. There's so many exciting things happening in the Central Iowa region, in the Greater Des Moines area, ESM, USA, and I think this is one of those. And I appreciate the other participants tuning in and really taking a look at what can we do to become better in these areas. So often with civility, we look at civility at what can others do to be better, and we get better in civility when I get better in civility. So that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the partnership's focus on this. So I'm pulling my PowerPoint up, get the slideshow going here. It is not allowing me to go to the slideshow dial.
Scott, I think if you go, well, either down to the right next to the zoom in, there's one of the buttons will get you to that PowerPoint. There you go. Does that work?
Got it. Thank you for the help. See, we're all helping each other here. That's the other thing I love about working in this community. So today we're going to dial in on creating your own action plan around civility. We're going to talk about a couple of different strategies here, and I really hope that throughout this you're thinking, how and where can I use these strategies? I was talking with one of our new basketball coaches in the state, and we were talking about how you learn things. And we could have a 1-hour session on how to shoot free throws, but none of us would get better at shooting free throws unless we went out on the court and actually practiced and shot free throws. And the same is true with civility. If we want to become better in civility, and how we address it and approach it, I need to not only know the strategies, but I need to then practice those strategies. I hope that you can do that. And as Andrea said, I'm the executive director of the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center. Our mission is to improve civility through character development and ethical leadership. Governor Ray firmly believed, and I agree, that when we get our best character competencies in order, as well as our ethical leadership, that one of the outcomes from that is an enhanced level of civility, both individually and collectively. As you know, we work with the 6 pillars of character and character counts. On the youth serving front, we serve over 8 million youth worldwide, right here from Drake University, the Ray Center, and Des Moines, Iowa. And it's based on the 6 pillars of character. And one of the things that's really important about the 6 pillars and any core values, whether it's the organization you work for or the own core values you have personally, is to think of them as I and action orientation. So when I think of the 6 pillars, I think of them as, what can I, Scott Racker, do today to act in a capacity worthy of trust? What can I do to treat people with respect, regardless of how they may treat me or what their opinions are or what I think of them? How can I treat them with respect? And what can I do to be responsible and accountable for the choices I make and the consequences that come from those choices, both positive and or corrective or negative? What can I do to demonstrate fairness, be equitable in the decisions that I make for people's impact that it has on them? Can I demonstrate a caring heart? And can I be a good citizen today in all the communities I belong to, from my own family to the Drake community, to the Greater Des Moines community, the state, the country, and the world? The reason I give you that is we're going to give you other strategies and tools, but for me, for the last 30 years, intentionally thinking about the 6 pillars as the core values that I want to emulate in action today are a good guidepost as we start working towards a more civil society. One of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, there's a lot of research out about how do you affect change. There's an element of civility of seeking to understand and understanding and be understood. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But there's also an element of civility where you're actually coming into an environment that you want to evoke or impact change. You want to invite change. I was thinking last night here in Iowa, as our legislature is in overtime, and I've been in that position. I've been the appropriations chair trying to negotiate out a budget. And what we're really trying to do at that point is people have their own thoughts of what they want to see to end the session and the budget. And in order to get out of the session, you have to evoke and invite change. Somebody has to change in their position to find the common ground that everybody can find the win-win to change. But that happens, and the research says, when you want to have things change, you need to invite others for that change. And it tends to be in this pyramid. And it starts with the mindset. What am I trying to do? What am I wanting to have the outcome? And then it builds up to relationships, to listening and learning, to teaching and communicating, and then inviting the change. And sometimes we go right to the top step. I want you to change. I want you to change your opinion. I want you to change your position. You're wrong. Those statements that put people on the defensive. What we really need to be doing is think about to help make that happen. It always happens from the step below. If you don't have the change yet, you need to teach and communicate why that's important. If you haven't taught or communicated to someone why that's important, you really need to listen and learn what their perspective is. Oh, I didn't understand that's what you meant. And from that, it's helpful to build relationships. And that's why, as we had in our last session with social media, the challenge of dealing with people on social media where they don't have a relationship can be very challenging and, in fact, daunting. So invite change in order to seek solutions is a mindset. Now, shaping that culture of civility comes from leadership. That's your own leadership. Your leadership shapes culture. The culture shapes the character of the individual actions, and then you get the outcome, the optimal performance that we deal with. The challenge to this is that there are other influences in this. In organizational work, you think of it as your mission, your vision, the philosophy. We were talking earlier, Andrea and I were about just the core values of both of our organizations and what we try to bring to the table and how we respond to that. That shapes and influences the culture of civility. And there's another set of influences. And those are the things that you see on the bottom there, the circumstances. So just think of the environment we're continuing to live in and what we've lived in. What were the circumstances 1 year ago today? At the first part of May, as we were in the beginning heights of COVID with lack of knowledge and understanding of things, how that shaped our own leadership, the culture, and the reactions and responses that we had. So it's important to understand the context of shaping culture for optimal performance is based on our ability to demonstrate these core competencies: excellence, integrity, growth and balance, teamwork, and community. If you want to get optimal performance in yourself and your work and those you're working with, these things need to be operating in a synergy well together. And when they're not, when one of those is not operating well, then we lose out on the context and the ability to have operating our optimal performance. So you think when things are going really well in your work and your life, these things in yourself and your colleagues in the workplace are going well. When things are not going well, you'll see challenges. I think organizations and businesses are really wrestling with this right now as we look at re-entry into work. What's important to people that have been remote for a year or more? And how do we engage that? There's civility around that. What change do you want? You want people to come back to work? How do we do that with civility? So with that today, what we're going to do is we're going to dial into an action plan on civility, my civility action plan. It's going to be your own plan. And it has been in a handout that Ryan sent out yesterday, as well as a fillable PDF. And probably either Ryan or Andrea has or will put that into the chat so that you can have this. As I enter into this, I want to give a couple of quick hitters that are important to think about as it relates to the communication side of how you build an action plan. First of all, relationships, as we saw on the diagram, are important. Taking the intentionality to build relationships with those that are new and different, the courage and curiosity to do that, and have the mindset that even though I might not know you well and I want to engage with you about this particular issue, it is an opportunity for you to also be building relationship with that person. In any engagement, I always think it's helpful, if nothing else, to have my own mindset about what's it going to take for me to do my best work and treat each other with care and respect in this dialogue, in this communication, in this interaction. And if you've already built the relationship, then you can have that together jointly with the person. What's it going to take for us to do our best work and treat each other with care and respect? I'll come back to that in the action plan. You also need to think about it. I found this to be very helpful. How do I communicate? When I get triggered on a hot point for me with civility and I want to just react, I need to stop and pause and think about who am I communicating with and how best can I respect them in this communication. The other thing that's been important for me is what outcomes do I want to achieve, but what do I want to avoid happening? And when and where will be the most important context for those communications. In communications, you need to, again, seek to understand as well as to be understood. You need to verify and clarify with people so that you really understand what they're saying and they understand what you're saying. I would really encourage you to use statements like I think, I feel, I plan, I don't understand in the I sense, and avoid the you statements. You're wrong, you don't understand. It puts people on the defensive. Just think how you react with those. So with that, I want to just give you that as a quick hitter background. We're going to start with context. The context, and I want you to think in your own life right now, what are the things that trigger you? What are hot button points for you as it relates to the context of how I get charged up or amped up on civility? For me, one of those, actually, there's a whole range of them that for me rest in what I would call constitutional issues, free speech and hate speech. The context where people have the freedom by our Constitution to say what they want. We have that as a constitutional right. However, we also have with that the right of free speech. It does not absolve us from the responsibility and the accountability of what we say. And there's so many elements of this that get me charged up. When I see people put things in large group context together, the opportunity when people look at absolutes with things, that every person in this particular group is wrong, whether that be a political group, whether that be a social network, that are wrong. Those things get me charged up with the absolutes because they're just not true. We were talking earlier, let's bring this down to things that are happening right now in our community. Types of things that get me charged up, or when I see on social media this great opportunity to have our farmers market open up again. With challenges that we've had, these vendors have not been able to do their work. Now they can do some work. We're able to bring people there, and people get all charged up about what the protocols might be with masks or no masks. And they go after it and they attack it with negative speech. In fact, in many cases, in some cases, not many, in some cases, I would say hateful speech. Hateful speech around wanting to change the mask protocol at the farmers market is not going to change the mask protocol at the farmers market. Think of what's happened with the Drake relays and the wonderful opportunity for people to run at the relays, but the lack of availability for tickets for parents of high schoolers and the hate speech that came around that without seeing the context of what we were trying to do. My point is, I want you to be thinking about what triggers you. Those types of things trigger me. I want to engage with people. I want them to have a greater understanding. I would like them to change in that. And so I want to give you just a moment, and don't go further in the diagram here. I want you to just think in the context. What are the things that trigger you as it comes into civility? When you think you've joined this call for some reason, maybe you want to get better, maybe you want to know what the strategies are, we've got to be aware of what are the things that trigger it. So I want to give you a minute, and I'm also going to tell you as you're thinking of this, I want you to write it down. And as you write that down, when we get to the end of this plan, we are going to put you in a small group one-on-one just to share your plan with somebody so that you've got an articulation of what your plan is. So again, what are the things that trigger you? And it could be more than one, but don't go more than three. What are the things that trigger you as it relates to civil action that you could take? And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to a minute to jot that down, and then I'm going to come back and we'll move on to the next one. I'm going to bring you back now. Thanks for taking the time to write something down. I hope you all found something that you could find that triggers you as it relates to civility. Also, just as a reminder, if you have questions, don't hesitate to put those in the chat, and we will catch up on those as we conclude our time today. Now that we know the context, one of the things that challenges me is I know what triggers me. I know the person or the organization that triggered it, and now I just want to jump into the action because, of course, I think I know I'm right, and I need to make sure that they understand that I'm right and they're wrong in this. So I want to jump to the action. This is where the most important next step is that before you jump to your actions, you really need to give it a little thought. You need some mindset. There's two purposes for this. One is that in the reaction when you're charged up about something, it's that time when you get that email from a coworker that just charged you up and you write that very quick email and response. It's curt, it's short. You don't intend for it to be taken as negative, but you send it off without really reading it or thinking about what it looks like, even pausing 10 minutes and reviewing it before you send it. It's a good practice. There's pause point when you're charged up is very important. The other is that there's a lot of research and science out there right now about how mindset affects actions. And I'll give you an example. There's a recent research study out of Stanford that talked to individuals that worked in the hospitality industry. And they told one group of individuals in the service end of the housekeeping about the number of calories that they burned every day by making beds, by sweeping the floors, vacuuming the floors, cleaning the bathrooms, how many calories they burned. They did not tell the other group this. And they did a study on them. And the group that they informed that all the calories they were burning through their work, they actually lost weight and lowered their blood pressure over both a 6 and 12-month period compared to the control group. They did a similar study where they brought Stanford students in and they gave them a milkshake and they told them it was the chocolate decadence milkshake and it had 2,000 calories. And they gave them the milkshake, they drank it, they tested their blood, and the enzyme that's released that tells your body that you're full was rampant in their system, and it told their body they were full. 2 weeks later, they brought them in and they gave them the super light chocolate milkshake, only had 250 calories. They did the blood test, those enzymes were not released in the students. In both cases, it was the same milkshake with 750 calories. Mindset does affect chemistry and body. Mindset affects our actions. So it's important to consider the mindset because it will affect your actions as it relates to civility. So I mentioned in one of those earlier slides about preparing to communicate. The number one thing I'm doing in my mindset is I'm thinking, what do I want to achieve and what do I want to avoid? This might be a situation, if this is a conversation, let's say that Jay Byers and I are having, I just want to understand Jay's perspective better. I'm really not coming into this to try and change Jay's mind. But it might be that, I've got a pre-existing relationship with Jay. I know I've got candor in relationships and trust. I do think he's wrong on this particular point, and I do want to change his mind. So I might want to achieve that, but it's important to know what you're trying to achieve. What do I want to avoid? I value Jay as a friend. I love him as a colleague. I do not want to damage that relationship. I want to avoid damaging my relationship with Jay in this particular context. I also think to myself in this particular situation, this might be because I think Jay might be wrong in this case. He said something that I don't think is right. And in fact, Jay didn't intend it because I assume best intentions of Jay, but I perceived that as maybe being a little negative or a little harsh, and I didn't. It's just out of character for Jay. And this might be an opportunity for me to be an educator, right? This can be a place of how can I bring in the learning and the context. And then I also think about the mindset, because sometimes I have the reaction of, you know what, I'm not going to engage in this. I see some people on the Facebook posts or Twitter or other posts that might be, that's just out of character for that person. But you know what? I'm just not going to engage in that. That's not me. You can't pick every battle, and you need to choose battles you want to pick up with people, right? But then you also have to the context of this is wrong information. They're taking this in a direction that's not helpful to our community or resolution. And if I don't engage with them, who's going to do that? Who's going to be the person, who's going to be the person that's going to call someone out on Facebook or call them in, as it could be, that's posted something on Facebook that's a false piece of information and they're perpetuating it as truth. Who is the person that's going to do that? And if I don't engage in doing that, how am I going to do that? So I really look to this of I want to seek to understand, and then I want to learn what they're going to say, and I may want to change. But it's the mindset that I bring to this, and it's related to communication. And even if you don't have a relationship, it can build a relationship. So I want you to think about in your triggering areas, what would be the mindset that you would want to do, that you would want to bring in this, that would be important for you to think about as you move into that engagement. Before you take your action, what is it that you want to think about? So why don't you jot down a couple of things in the mindset? I'm going to give you a minute to jot down. I've given you some examples that you can use. You've got the handout, you can flip back. One of the things that you can use there is that preparing to communicate. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to avoid? And the other thing is also thinking about where's the best place to do that, which is also a great action. I'll give you a minute to fill that out, and then we'll come back to the next step. All right, hopefully you've been able to write some things down about mindset. Again, I can't emphasize the critical nature of when you're at one of those trigger points, when it comes up, that you pause and you think through what's my mindset and what do I want to achieve and avoid. It's just critically important that you do that before you move into the next, what are the actions that I'm going to take. And again, now that I've thought of the mindset, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to avoid? Now I can start to map out what those actions look at. So the intentionality of thinking this through is very important. Where we find escalation of incivility is when people are just immediately reactive and it escalates. And what you want to try and do is find common ground and de-escalate these situations. So for me, when I think of the situation, again, I'm just, Jay, I appreciate you letting me be using you, because I think it's important for us to understand these are personal engagements, right? This is not just like out there in space. These are personal engagements. We all have feelings, emotions, egos, and they're all wrapped up in this. So the first thing that I look for in action is where and when am I going to have this conversation with Jay? So like if this had happened in a real case, I would not do it on a Zoom call that the partnership's having on a webinar and call Jay out publicly in this, or call him in publicly and tell him he's wrong. I do believe in the little league theory, which is public praise and private critique. When Jay does things well, which he does as an advocate for civility, I praise that, and I like to do that publicly. If there's something I would see that could be done better, I would do that privately. That's why social media, as we learned in the last session, is not the best place to, you're not going to change somebody's opinion by making a comment on their social media post that they were wrong on this. And, oh, now that Scott said that, I'm sure that I was wrong. That's not how you do it. So when and where is very important. But I want to listen first. I want to understand. And so I might even say to Jay, I don't understand. Please explain to me what it was you were trying to get, because the way I took that was differently. But explain to me, ask questions. In this communication dialogue, again, I take you back to some simple practices in basic level communication. Don't put people on the defensive. Invite them in. I think, I feel, I don't understand what you were trying to say. When you use those you statements, you're wrong. You always put false sources out there. You don't understand the rest of the story. You don't understand the context. Then they're going to come back with that as well as the negativity. The other thing that I want to look to in actions is I always want to form connections and I want to find common ground. I've got several examples in my own life of people that I actually started engaging with because I had differences with them, and now they've become very close friends of mine. And I think so every engagement and interaction that you have, you don't know when that might not have an impact. And again, an example I've used before is when Governor Ray was first in China after we'd opened the door to the diplomacy with Chinese. We hadn't talked to the Chinese for decades. And Governor Ray wanted to invite them and did invite them to Iowa to show hospitality because he saw that people that were formerly the enemy that we didn't even talk to could be great purchasers of our agricultural products, and he lensed it from the opportunity to build relationships rather than what had happened in the past, what the future could be. And you just don't know. And I saw this in the legislature, and I think it's true for all of us. People that you might be on the opposing side of something in the legislature on a bill in the morning, you might be co-sponsoring an amendment with them in the afternoon. And you can't do that if you don't use these opportunities where you have differences to build relationships. So when you're charged up about an issue, a context that you've got and identified, and you've thought it through, what actions could you take to try and get to that? Now, again, think about that in the change model. If what I want to do is I want to achieve change in Jay, I need to inform him. So another action might be, I need to have my own research. I need to have my own data. I need to bring the facts and present those in a clear way and be open to understanding the other side of the issue, whatever that issue may be. And again, think of the mask issue right now. We're hearing, it's continued to evolve. And as things continue to move, this is going to be a continued issue in our community. And we need to be thinking about what's the other side's perspective on this? What's my perspective on this? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here, no more than 2, because the time seems very long when you're in an action orientation. But I want you to write down what actions you can take on the context areas that charge you up with civility after you've thought of your mindset. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. All right, I'm going to bring you back. What I hope you were able to do in that 2 minutes is think about the individual actions that you can take. It's important to think that through. I like to think about proactive steps and positive reactionary steps in my own life. What is it I'm trying to achieve really helps me in the mindset of what action steps I want to take in addressing those particular cases. And again, I mentioned the social media element. We had a great session on that a couple of weeks ago. And if you haven't listened to that, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that panel discussion, because it talked a lot about how the actions that you take there have an impact for change by how you articulate, but also the understanding of what's the best way if you're really wanting to change somebody is probably not, as I said, through that group full account, but how do you build the relationship to make it happen? So now we've been charged up about an issue. We've thought a little bit about our mindset and our actions around that mindset. And now we need to do the next phase, which is reflection. What was the outcome? I saw something that Jay said that I didn't understand, didn't seem like Jay. I know Jay's not that type of person. I don't want to damage our relationship. I want to achieve at least an understanding of what Jay was saying, possibly educate him on my perspective of that. But I definitely want to avoid damaging any relationships. I've listened to Jay. I've got a new insight that I didn't understand what he was saying about that. So maybe I've changed a little bit. But I also asked some probing questions, and Jay came to maybe a greater understanding of what my perspective was. And through that, we might have even enhanced our relationship to a deeper level, where it's one thing to say you have candor in relationships of trust. It's another thing to be candid with someone that you have a relationship of trust with in order to understand and seek to do better. So the outcome is a piece that I look to. What did I achieve here? Was the outcome that I had wanted, did I achieve that? And did I avoid the things that I did not want to happen? I talk about, for me, it's the drive home test. I find it's a good reflective time for me to think about these types of things. It doesn't need to be in a car. It can just be that pause moment where you stop and assess. But a lot of times in our world, we are so fast-paced with so many things. We have the engagement, we just move on. And we don't reflect. The key question that I ask myself is, what could have I done to have been better in that engagement? What can I have done better in that engagement to get the outcome I wanted if I did not get it? I get concerned sometimes in the civility initiatives. And we certainly do not want to position ourselves, nor are we the civility police. We can't control the actions or efforts of other ones any more than you can. What we can do is try and build a plan where there's individual action that what we can do. So I'd like you to think about 2 things in this, is intentionally, where would you reflect? Where would that space be that you would reflect? The 5 minutes before I fall asleep at night, I want to reflect on that, or the drive home, or the walk around the block. And what type of reflection questions would you ask yourself? Like the one that I stated for me is, what could have I done better or differently in this situation? I'll give you about a minute to think about that and write that down. All right. Hopefully you've been able to think about in the reflection, where would you reflect and what type of questions would you ask yourself? So what we've just done here in a very short period of time, I hope for each of you that's participating, is for you look at what would an action plan around civility look like for me. The first is the awareness step of the context of what are the things that charge me up. When I find those, when I look for those in my life, or I see them appearing in my life, knowing that those are chargers for me, what's my mindset? Even to the point of, is this someone I'm going to engage with or not? Or is this just to understand their differences with me? Or do I want to try and change their mind? And what approach would I take? And then thinking through what actions I would take, the individual actions that I would take with that, and how would I assess the ability to do that? The other thing that I'd like to encourage you to think about is when you look at context, mindset, action, and reflection, try and apply that when you see situations out there that do bring to context about how could this have been done better or differently. And I'll give you just one example of this from within the last year. So like other places across the country, with the issues around racial equity, social justice coming out of the George Floyd killing, that we had social protests, we had social unrest in our community. There was violence attributed to that in cases. And I still remember watching the protest that was at Terrace Hill. Maybe some of you saw this on the media or recall this, where our state troopers were up on the upper part of the hill and the protesters were on the lower part. And I was looking at that at the context from, this is a charged event. What do the state troopers want? They want to protect the property and have peaceful demonstrations. What the protesters want, they want to have people understand the angst and frustration, fear, and even anger that they have about the situations that they're in. And then I noticed, and you may have seen, and I do know this person, but one of the state troopers put down his shield and walked down the hill and met with one of the leaders. And they had a one-on-one conversation. It wasn't shouting at each other in the public. So even though it was in a public arena, it was still a private conversation. What did they want to achieve and avoid? I think they wanted to achieve things not getting out of hand. They wanted to avoid things getting out of hand and at least have an understanding of how this could end peacefully and well. And then what were the actions that they took, both respectively, where they were even taking the action of having that conversation? And then the reflection on that, I'm sure both sides that were engaged in that had that reflection. My point is, you can look to things that you see in others, in group dynamics of what can we do better or differently. Andrea and I were just having this conversation about the farmers market before this call started. What an amazing thing for those of us that love the farmers market. What a tremendous thing it draws to our community. And the fact that we missed it for a year and now we have it back, yet we've got this acrimony, this angst, and in some cases, anger and hate speech around what the protocols are of the farmer market. We've got to keep the perspective of the bigger picture of the things we want to look at, to achieve, and do, but understand the perspectives that others bring. So what I'd ask you to do now, I'm going to have Ryan is going to send you into a one-on-one. You may end up being in one that is maybe 3, and it's going to be 7 minutes long. So be efficient with your time. This may be somebody you don't know, so state your name, who you are, maybe who you represent or work with, or just why you joined the call, but be brief in that. And I want each of you to say the context, what are the things that trigger me? What would be my mindset? these are the actions I would look, and this is how I would reflect. I want you to share your plan, even though it might be somebody new or different, because there's a process to this, and I ask you to trust the process. So you'll have 7 minutes, and then you'll come back, and you'll get a warning, I believe, from Ryan when you're about to come back. So Ryan, I'll have you send people into their groups, and then we'll come back and get ready to close out. All right, thank you very much for taking the time to share with each other. There's a purpose to that, and that whenever you're dealing with these types of issues and action plans, even if it's somebody you don't know, it is, number one, a way to build new relationship, but there's a certain accountability if you've shared and even acknowledging what are the trigger points, how do I want to think about that, and what is it that I'm going to do in action. While you were chatting, we were also chatting. One of the things I also want to bring into this conversation is we've dialed this in today as individuals. What can I do? And that's so critically important. But many of us represent, are part of organizations. Organizations also play a role in this. And I would tell you the Ray Center and the Greater Des Moines Partnership are two that have roles in these types of issues. And what do we do to become proactive in the causes and cases that are important to us to get better? We would not be having this webinar chats if it had not been important to the partnership and to the Ray Center to see what we can do to be better about civility in our community. I'll give you another example that we were talking about with the partnership and the role that they play in our community. If you go back and listen to the annual meeting and you hear Chair Fred Bowie's remarks, Fred was very intentional about how diversity, equity, and inclusion was going to be a woven point of moving forward for the partnership. That wasn't just Fred speaking. That was Fred on behalf of his chair role with the partnership, of maybe that proactive claim that this is what we want to get better in. And I think the same is true with civility. And through those partnerships, get down to the slide, I thought it was on the right slide, I apologize. Through those partnerships, we've worked with the Greater Des Moines Partnership, Capital Crossroads, Community Foundation, the Interfaith Alliance on a Show Some Respect campaign. This is something that we really try to advance in individual action, typically around campaign times, also during the legislative session. We've sent this out to the affiliate chambers that they use in their public forums. And there's in the handout I put in, and it's got more detail, but here's some other actions you can take. What are ways that you can show respect in the way you treat people, accepting differences, relying on facts and not assumptions? Those are all critical action steps that you can take. And you can encourage in others through your organizational structures. We also provide through that outlet, what are the keys to a respectful meeting? You've probably seen some of this, and if you've been involved in the partnership or the Capital Crossroads meetings, how they open up their meetings with a statement of advocacy of what they expect to see in those meetings. I know the Urbandale Chamber does this in Fort Dodge Chamber as well. They open every community meeting with a statement that in Urbandale, we aspire to be a community of character. And in tonight's meeting, we will all strive to conduct ourselves with trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. So the types of things that I'm talking about are these proactive steps that you could take. And then there's accountability that comes from that. These are just good tips. And then what we also have, if you'd like, and we can bring you more information on this, get in touch with me directly at the Ray Center, is we've got tips for meeting moderators. Think of the chamber affiliate meetings where they have forums with legislators and things of that nature. You want to provide a welcome. You need to set expectations. You know, in our chamber, this is how we're going to operate. This is what we expect and don't expect. There's not going to be personal attacks, demeaning comments. We'll stay within that context. Reminding participants of those expectations, and we need to model. If I'm going to talk about civility and Jay's going to talk about civility, which we both do, we both better be modeling civility. Neither of us are perfect people because there are no perfect people, but we need to assume best intentions in people as we're working to do this. One of the difficult ones on these meeting moderators is using good eye contact. That's tough to do on Zoom calls because you find yourself looking at pictures rather than looking at the camera. Don't allow anonymity. And when in doubt, you should act. Bringing that back to what we talked about today. Is this a place that I want to act and that I want to engage? And finally, what I'd like to just close with before we have a minute or two for questions is knowing what to do is not enough. We have to do it. That's why I'm really pleased in the work the partnership is doing. We haven't spent 3 sessions trying to diagnose and dissect what's the issue, what's the problem. That's not the question. We know we can get better as a community. What are the tools and strategies we can use to get better? With that, I'm going to take down my screen share, and Andrew, you can let me know if there are any questions on the chat or if anybody's got a question before I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Scott. I don't have any, although I did just send a note out. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to pop off mute, or if you would want to put them in the chat. Is there anything from the audience?
Last thing I'd say then, Andrea, is I would encourage each of you, it's the power of one. Each of you sat, you spent the time, you went through this. If you thought it was of value, you can share this with someone else. Hey, I was part of this. I think it would be good to bring into our team meeting. You could bring it into your organization. And if you were not part of one of the first two, I would really encourage you, if this tweaked your interest on this, the resources that are available through the partnership and through the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center at Drake University are here to help you to transform our lives and strengthen our communities, and that's what we're all about. So I thank you, Andrea, Jay, and I want to give a special shout out to Ryan for making all of the IT work, and we look forward to continuing next steps to strengthen our community.
Thank you, Scott. We really appreciate it, and with that, I'm going to turn it to Jay to wrap us up.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea, and thanks, Scott. Really appreciate your leadership, your friendship, your vision, and your call to action. Really appreciate the long-time relationship we've had with Drake University and with the Ray Center and Character Counts, and just really appreciate all that you bring to our region and state, and again, the partnership is very much appreciated. I've mentioned this before in this series, but it's one of the things I think that the DSM USA region has been very strong at for many years. Even long before I've ever been around and doing this work, and that's about finding common ground and coming together to elevate our region. Right? It's never really been about Democrat versus Republican. It's never been about red versus blue. It's certainly never been about urban versus rural, and all these themes that continue to sort of arise and nationally and statewide on different fronts. But I think that we've been able to sort of rise above that in terms of our public-private partnerships and regionalism, and quite frankly, even within our government affairs work at the regional level, state level, and federal level. And it's one of the things we've prided ourselves on. And it's in many ways, it's never been more difficult than it is right now. But in many more ways, it's never been more important. And really proud of the work that Andrea and Ryan have been doing to lead our work, and all of our volunteers. And again, we need to continue to do that. So just want to remind everybody that today's session has been recorded. We'll be sharing that with all of you. It's also will be on our YouTube channel as well, along with the previous sessions that we partnered with Scott and the Ray Center on. So please feel free to share those with anyone who you think would find this helpful and interesting. Because again, certainly we could use a lot more civility in our society today, and we all need to step up and be leaders. So please feel free to share this content far and wide, and make sure that it lives on beyond just this series of webinars that we've hosted. And we have again some really great content to share with our friends and colleagues, not only in our region, but across the state, across the country, and across the world. One of the things that sort of I try to pride myself on is, if you look at my social media channels, one of the things I have in all of them is I say three things: think big, live large, be nice. And I think that's, whether it's the golden rule or whatever it is you sort of live by, right? I think it's that sort of civility and be nice. It really goes a long way, right? And again, I try to live by that, and I know I don't always accomplish that, but I think that's really sort of what this is all about. How do we be civil? How do we treat each other with respect? Just want to remind everybody as well, a lot of great partnership events coming up. Specifically, we do have our next investor briefing later today. I guess today is Drake Day at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, because our presenters today will be President Marty Martin and Brian Harden, the athletic director, talking about the exciting infrastructure projects that are going on at Drake University, but also a lot of the changes that are happening and continuing to move forward with the athletic department as well too. We'll also have updates, as we always do, at least that we have since COVID, with our healthcare leaders at Unity Point and Mercy One, with David Stark and Carl Keeler. And so great opportunity to get updates in terms of vaccination rates and infection rates and what we need to do collectively as a community, again, moving forward to find that common ground and to make decisions based off of facts and not based off of politics. So again, moving forward, call to action, as we're, very, very exciting, right? I think hopefully you've all sort of felt, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I know I have more and more events and more things happening in the public. There's mention of the farmers market. Been to multiple annual dinners for our regional chambers and dinners and even some receptions, but things are changing rapidly out there. Very, very exciting for that momentum. But we want to make sure, I should say, that we don't lose this moment in terms of creating that better future for all of us. And part of that, creating that better future, in terms of, how can we be more inclusive? How can we be more sustainable? How can we be more resilient and how can we be more innovative? And as we've talked about today, how can we be more civil? How can we create more civility? And how can we create that model of civility for the rest of the state and the rest of the country as we work on Capital Crossroads and all the different things we do? What can we do to be best in class and model that we can show that is still not only possible, but it is an effective strategy for community development. So Scott, thank you so much for your leadership again and the Ray Center. And again, this is a journey, right? We all need to continue to work on it. We all can be better, and we can all model that behavior for others. So thanks so much, and look forward to working with all of you moving forward.